Hello, hey, how's it going, you guys? It's going good? It's good. It's good. Yeah, this is Ben here. I got a new video out. This video is just a vlog. Me talking about. This is Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It just came out earlier this month, and I'm really excited about it. I'll add an addendum. Really, I'm going to be talking about kind of the history of Pathfinder and 5th edition, and then I'm going to be doing kind of a first impressions on Pathfinder 2nd edition because I just got it, and so I read through it. I played a little bit of a playtest, and I read through those rules, and so I kind of have a general idea of what's in here, and I read it, but, okay. It's really not in a review. I just want to say that is, I'm going to be talking about Pathfinder, but it's a first impressions, because it's always tough whenever you get a rule system. You can read through the rules as much as you want, but really until you actually play it, it's hard to get a solid idea of how it functions. Although I did do the playtest, so it gives me a general idea of how it's supposed to work. But, it's until you've really played like many games, it's tough to do a solid statement of how the game functions at the table, because it's just any kind of a rule system is very complex. On that note, I'm also going to be talking about how it plays, which, it varies from group to group, it varies from person to person, and so I'm going to be making predictions about how I think this thing is going to be played, and because of the different personalities involved, it's tough, but I'll try. I'm going to make some predictions on how I think this thing works. Once again, first impressions video and kind of a predictions. But anyway, that's it. This is the video. All right, let's get started. Where first edition really came in was around kind of when 3.5 was being phased out. Okay, let me explain the history. You have Dungeons & Dragons You have Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 came out. A lot of people really liked it. And, every edition that comes out, people think it's like, oh, this is, the best edition. Every edition has different fans. 3.5 Dungeons & Dragons came out. It was going to get phased out for 4th edition. A lot of people didn't like 4th edition. Because 3.5 was released under open game license, what that meant is that anyone could take that material or take those rules and then republish them. Usually they adapt them to a new setting or a new system. What that meant is that Pathfinder came in, they took the rules for 3.5 and then basically republished them with some new updates, and that became Pathfinder. And so Pathfinder came out of this desire to kind of protect 3.5. It was almost kind of like to be this now, like we're going to be the stewards of this game. And of course there was a lot of updates that were done to it. There were a lot of rules changed. They didn't just completely port it over, but the system is like 95% Dungeons & Dragons. It's really close with some fixes that were done in order to close some holes in the rules. The primary point of Pathfinder was to kind of protect 3.5, that game style, and continue to publish material for it. And so it's been out. It's been doing great. And it is interesting how successful it's been, considering the fact that, you have 4th edition came out and it really wasn't doing as well. And so you now have these two games that are competing, which is Pathfinder and Dungeons & Dragons. And Pathfinder was a ported version of kind of an older Dungeons & Dragons game. Then 5th edition came out. And 5th edition has been really, really tremendously popular. Then it was announced Pathfinder 2nd edition was going to be coming out. And there was a lot of suspicions or people thinking, myself included, that what was going to happen is that Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition went like really streamlined. They tried to take a lot of the rules and sort of simplify them down into a base mechanic. And there was a suspicion that like maybe Pathfinder 2nd edition is going to be coming out and maybe it's going to be trying to go towards 5th edition. And having read through the rules, having read through the 2nd edition rules, I don't think so. It's more, I think that they clarify a few things, and I think that Pathfinder 2nd edition, their major goal was to try and make it like easier, but it's not as simple as 5th edition, and which to a lot of people I think are going to be happy with. Personally, I love 5th edition. I really enjoy it. I don't know if I'd like that kind of a system, because then you're kind of stuck in a weird situation. Let me explain. when 5th edition came out, going into kind of more of the background, was a lot of people really didn't like it. And there's still a lot of people who really hate it, because what 5th edition did is it took a lot of the core mechanics of Dungeons & Dragons and just completely ripped them out of the system. They're like, this is gone, this is gone, this is gone. And they basically gutted a lot of the mechanics. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition now has the system advantage, disadvantage, and it used to work on a modifier system. And what the modifier system is that those worked on +2, -2, -3. It was some kind of a number that was plus or minus. And whenever things in the game would happen, you would get these bonuses or modifiers. Like this would be a -4, this would be a +2. And the modifiers were all stackable. So if you got a +2 from this thing, and then you got a +1 from this, and then you got a +3 from that, it'd be, this is a 2, this is a 2, this is a 4, this is a 3, and all the numbers would add up. But when 5th edition came out, they just had advantage, disadvantage. They got rid of those little bonuses, most of them, or at least they really tried to scrap out as many of them as they could, and everything was just advantage, disadvantage, or a straight roll. And those would cancel, where advantage would cancel with disadvantage to just give you a normal roll. The reason why they switched to that is because, they were trying to get rid of as much math as they could. Going back, actually talking about proficiency, funny thing, they were even gonna basically get rid of proficiency bonuses. So if you notice, when you play Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the bonuses for proficiency are +2, +3, +4, +5, and +6. And +6 you get kind of around like 20th level. It's like the highest you'll go up to, and it doesn't go up beyond that. And the reason why they selected those numbers was because originally you weren't going to have a flat bonus number. It was going to be a die. So this was a D4, a D6, a D8, a D10, and a D12. And that was originally during the playtest. That's what they had. But eventually, I don't know if it playtested badly or there was issues or something like that, but eventually they just switched it to a flat bonus, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then that was what got released. But still, if you go to the DMG, they tell you can swap out the proficiency bonuses for dice. It plays perfectly well. And that was, once again, that was originally how it was intended to be developed, was because they just flat wanted to get rid of the modifiers. And you just had that's why they call them ability score rolls, because it was just going to be ability scores. Anyway, point I'm getting at is that when 5th edition came out, they kind of reached in there and sort of gutted a lot of the mechanics. And a lot of people were not happy about that, because now everything works on advantage, disadvantage. Pathfinder I feel like it is trying to cater more, and some would argue successfully. I don't know. We haven't decided if it's successful or not. It caters to people who want a more robust and complex system. And really a lot of kind of the core mechanics that you see in like Pathfinder 1st edition, they're there in 2nd edition. It's just that they've kind of tried to make the mechanics more streamlined, more like cleaner, so that way people can understand them. So that way, hopefully, when you're doing kind of the rinse and repeat of the rolling, it's not as clunky. People are comparing it to 5th edition and trying to say, okay, it's going the way of 5th edition, and it really isn't. I have heard some people comparing it to 4th edition, which really surprised me, really surprised, because 4th edition was so far off the tree in terms of kind of the development. In case you don't know, so 4th edition had this thing where you'd have these powers, and the powers were constantly coming on and off cooldown, and you'd use the powers to do various abilities. And let me tell you right now, that is not the system. The system does not use powers. But I do actually agree to some extent where with this system, they're trying to make it more, more newbie friendly. And so that, I guess you could kind of compare it to 4th edition in that way. And in addition, they brought back flat checks, which flat checks were something that you saw in 4th edition, where you roll a die. If it's 11 or higher, you succeed. If it's 10 or lower, there's no bonuses, you fail. It's like and that happens whenever you have like persistent damage or persistent checks. And let me explain. You get set on fire. Okay. And in 5th edition, you would every turn you'd make a dexterity save in order so that way you're not on fire anymore. Here, it's just you roll the die, and if you get a 15 or higher, you're no longer on fire. And they're trying to make it so that way these persistent things have more of a, you have a bunch of checks to see if the effect will end on your turn. Anyway. So I do kind of see where the comparisons between 4th edition are coming from, because, you know, new friendly and then the persistent checks and stuff, but it's still very different from 4th edition. 4th edition, once again, had kind of the powers coming off on and off cooldown, and that was it was such an unusual game that it's difficult to compare. Oh, one of the prefaces I want to say also is that I'm not an expert on Pathfinder. I have officially played like 10 games of Pathfinder, and I have read through the rulebook a few times. So I'm not the best well-versed on that, and so I'm probably not the best person to get, like, I know people want a really in-depth analysis of like how it compares to Pathfinder 1, and I'm probably not the best person to give that analysis. Anyway, so one is they have added one of the major changes that I actually really like is they added the Alchemist into the core rulebook. Let me explain. Every single goddamn game of Dungeons & Dragons, everyone's gonna add an Alchemist in there because people love Alchemists. Like, Alchemists are one of the things that always gets hacked into it, because I think a lot of players like the idea of being this scientist who's sitting there with the beakers and stuff. Like, it's really boring, let me tell you. It's not as exciting as it sounds, but it sounds really exciting in the movies. To sit there with the beakers and the burning of fire, blah, and then comes out and they have this bottle, like chicken bottles of people. Yeah. But anyway, people really like Alchemists, and even in like fantasy games that are not Dungeons & Dragons, like I'll often see people porting in Alchemists. And so, like, if there's going to be a character that gets ported in, it's going to be the Alchemist. And so the fact that they're like, this is a core character, like everyone wants to play it, I think makes perfect sense. So I really like the fact that the Alchemist is in there. One of the other changes that they made that is in there is they're interested in trying to make the characters like more mobile, like be able to move around in the fight more often. And so because of that, they have actually gotten rid of attacks of opportunity being every single character. Instead, I think it's mostly, I believe, fighters that have attacks of opportunity, that they just start with them. And the reason why they're getting rid of everyone having attacks of opportunity was there was actually a discussion with the developer, and one of the developers. And he talked about how what they think is that potentially attacks of opportunity slow the game down, because someone moves into combat and then they don't move because they think like, oh, I'm going to take these attacks of opportunity, or I'm going to waste my turn moving away. And so because of that, they want attacks of opportunity to be rare, because they want characters and players to be moving around in the battlefield, like adjusting themselves, like, oh, I have to go here, oh, I have to go here. And they feel like if you add attacks of opportunity, that means that the players are just staying in one place more often. So in order to get around that, they are making it so that way less characters have attacks of opportunity, so that way players will be more mobile. That's what they expect. Or this goes into the next thing. It's because of the 3-action rule also. So this is the biggest change that I am interested in, which is the 3-action rule. In other systems, it would be like you have your attack, you've got your move, and then maybe like a swift, you got like bonus, you got other little things that you can do on your turn. And then in 5th edition, we would say you'd had one reaction. In Pathfinder, they just say you have 3 actions. That's what you get. And so if you run over to someone, bash them in the face, and then run away, that is your 3 actions. It's running in, attacking, and then running away. If you want to pull something out of your bag, throw it at someone's face, and then run up to him and punch him in the face, that would be 3 actions. The reason why they've switched to that is they're trying to make it more like flexible. Like there's more variety, and particularly I think part of it also is to try and give the martial characters more stuff that they can do in their turn. Because if you were a martial character, you just sort of ran up to someone and punched them in the face. If you have 1 action you can do on your turn, you were punching someone in the face because that was what you'd spend your turn doing. With this system, the idea is that you could punch someone in the face and then do something else. You could like punch someone in the face and then block, or punch someone in the face and then cast a minor spell. Or that's the other thing, is that the magic system, the way that it works now, you don't just have one action spells. You have 1 action spells, 2 action spells, 3 action spells. And there might be a 1 action spell, which is like heal the guy next to you, a 2 action spell, which is like heal multiple guys spread out or something. They're trying to use that in order to have different actions. So that way you kind of mix and match, where like, ooh, this spell does less damage, but is only 1 action. And then this one does more damage, but is more expensive. You know, it costs like 2 actions. So thinking like, which one do I want to cast? Hopefully is to try and make it more flexible. And we'll see how that plays out. I'm both excited and also really apprehensive about it at the same time. In case you're wondering why I'm split, it's because I'm worried about the fight getting too cluttered. There's just too much stuff going on, because let's say that everyone has 1 action, then it's like, okay, 1 action, 1 action, 1 action, and then you kind of resolve all of them. But if all the players are having 3 actions that you have to wait through, it could be that it slows down the game, because now you're waiting for everyone to do their multiple actions. I'm also curious about how this like affects the monsters. Like, are the monsters gonna be kind of slow because they're having to go through each of their different attacks? We'll see. I think I'm not as big a fan. I remember when I did the playtest, the first attack was straight, and the next attack was a -5, and the last attack was a -10. And I remember just having to wait as people rolled through their attacks, and I remember it not being that much fun. But I have heard that they give players other actions to do, and so maybe we haven't really seen players kind of mixing and matching, and so maybe kind of down the line, as more actions are brought in, that maybe that's a little bit more exciting. We'll see, but it's one of those things I'm kind of apprehensive about. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna like this. I don't know if I'm not gonna like this. You know, it could be that it just makes things overly complicated. We'll see, but I'm interested in that. It sounds interesting. Okay. As I am going through my list of notes for different stuff to talk about, I realize that there's a lot of stuff to talk about, because there's a lot of like minor rules changes. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to talk about everything, but I can talk about some stuff, whatever I feel is kind of the most important. One of the things I really like, I think is interesting, is that the magic has a scale on it, where you have success, fail, and then you have like critical success, and then critical. They have like levels and tiers of fail versus tiers of success. And I like that because it adds a little bit more variability to the magic, because in other systems it'd be like success, fail. Okay, it failed. Then nothing happens. And so having it'd be like, oh, there's this added benefit that because this person crit failed the check on trying to save against this petrify spell, instead of being partially turned to stone, they're completely turned to stone. I think that's kind of interesting. I also I like how they do the stats as well, the base stats, where you start with, I think, like everything in like 10. Everything is 10. And then as you select your classes, backgrounds, and race, each of them give you ability score boosts, where it's like, oh, this is your background. Okay, you raise your dexterity and strength. Okay, you're this class, you get this bonus and this bonus. And so your stats are based on what you pick for your races and classes, and they give you these boosts, and then you have these free boosts that you can put anywhere. I think that's really clever, and I like it. And good job. Way to go. Oh, there's a big thing which I need to talk about with Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And this is that they have added a ton of feats and different options. This is one of the things that did in fact bother me with 5th Edition, which is that when you made a character at first level, the game just kind of goes like, okay, here's your character, and just hands it to you. And there's some minor differences, some slight modifications that you can do with base stats, and, you know, pick skills and pick equipment, and that's kind of it. You know, your character is like 90% done once you pick your class and your race and then your background, and that's kind of it. and it actually was not until fourth level that you got a feat where you had some like customizability, an ability score increase or a feat. And so you almost had no customizability until you got around like third, fourth level. Because third, that's when you got to pick your subclass. And that was a big reason why a lot of people picked humans in 5th edition, was just because they wanted that customizability, because it let them pick a feat. If you were going to play as an elf, you were going to go up to like 20th level. You got a feat at 4th level, you got a feat. At 8th level, you got a feat, and then I think it was like 12th and 16th. I can't remember exactly, but basically the idea is they were very stingy with feats. And so your character a feat, if you don't know, a feat is what lets you like customize your character, because it's a package of things that you purchase that give additional benefits to the character. And the fact that you'd go like 3 levels and then not get a thing that lets you like further customize the character was a little bit... I was kind of torn on, because on the one hand, it's like, oh, it's trying to be new player friendly, so they don't want to give players those options. But like, if you're a veteran of the game, a lot of people felt like the first 3 levels were whatever you pick as your race and class. That was kind of it. Whereas in Pathfinder 2nd edition, there's a lot of customizability out of the get-go, where you get to pick, I think, like 2, 3 feats, something around there. You get to pick a bunch of feats. And it's great because it adds a lot of customizability to the class. So that way, every character at first level can be unique. You know, they can be separate from each other. So that's pretty cool. I do have a few qualms with that, which is... I don't know exactly how... I have a fear. I have a concern. And I don't know if this is going to be an actual concern, but I'm a bit worried. And you can tell me that I'm full of shit if you want, and that's okay. My major concern, which I have, is that sometimes when I've played other games where they have a list of customizable options, what that means is that whoever has that customizable feat has now suddenly some ability that they can do that the other people can't do, which means that you have to be more restrictive on what other people can do. Let me explain. Let's say that there is a feat which says you get to punch someone in the face. That's what this feat does. What that means is that whoever has that feat can punch someone in the face. But what that means is that anyone who doesn't have that feat can't punch someone in the face. You know, you have to be more restrictive on that. I was looking through one book and it had a feat for like crafting rings or smithing rings. And anyone who had this feat could smith a ring. But I always have players who like, they kind of want to craft a ring. They want to make something, but they don't want to have that feat. So I don't know if this is going to have that same problem of players are going to want to do stuff and then I'm going to have to, you know, kind of police them, or I'm going to have to go through the rule book ahead of time and be like, look, I'm just going to give everyone this ability. I'm going to let you make this stuff. And so don't pick these feats because they aren't going to help you. And then sometimes I'll look through a feat and I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. Or it's like an exception to a rule and I was originally not going to enforce the rule, or I wasn't going to have a huge problem with it. Like, I was actually looking through the book recently, and it said that there was a ability which said you don't get a -2 penalty while climbing or while fighting while you're climbing or something. And I didn't even think about that. Like, oh yeah, I have to now have a -2 penalty to everyone who is climbing and while they're fighting. Now this one person is doing exception to that rule. And you already get into the problem a little bit in 5th edition with like the observant feat, where sometimes GMs do not use passive perception and players get irritated because it's like, hey, I have this feat that gives me a bonus to my passive perception. If you're not going to ever roll it, then this feat is useless. Or I believe there are assassin characters who, if you're a character that that uses surprise for your to get your advantage, to get your bonuses, and the GM is not using those rules, it can already be kind of a problem. And so it already has that problem in a rule set where there's not that many feats, and so I worry that it might even be like exponential in a rule, you know, if you're running around with 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever. Here's another interesting, cool thing. The number of spells. There's a ton of spells. There are so many of them. I think that's going to be really cool. It's going to be a pain to have to tell new players, because whenever I have to teach new players, it's always the spells which mess them up, of like, oh, this spell does this, this spell does this, this spell does this. And then their eyes after like the fourth or fifth spell just kind of glaze over. That's why I'll like hand someone a pre-gen and then just kind of try and teach them like, okay, write down like this is what the spell does. And I'll kind of give them a brief overview of how the spell works. But that's always the toughest. Everyone always gets skill rolls. Everyone gets like, oh, roll me athletics. Okay, you pick it up. But magic is always a little bit tougher. In addition, the way that the abilities and the powers and stuff scale is actually very different. In 5th edition, really, there's kind of a very gradual scale. You know, it goes like, okay, you have a +1, and then another +1, and a +2, and then +6, and then, you know, that's kind of it. It really doesn't. They tried to make it so that way, like, the monsters had similar rolls kind of closer to together. They didn't really want like a very steep scale. And whereas with Pathfinder, they're kind of going back to a very steep scale where you have characters at the bottom, and then characters at, you know, kind of going up very quickly. And if you are a low level character fighting a monster that is tough, like you physically cannot hit it, or your spells are just going to be failing. Like really, you're going to have a bad day. You know, some people like it, some people don't, and so I am curious to see how it plays out. I feel like the community is kind of split on whether or not they like that. I will explain the pros and cons of both systems, which is, if you have a steep scale, it makes the characters feel really heroic, because once they get to a certain level, like lower level monsters are not even a challenge for them. Like they can just take them down one-on-one. And that's the same with like the monsters, where if you run like a high level monster, it will just smoke the entire party. And it's way easier to have that kind of a difference just having 2, 3, 4 levels on characters. Whereas if you have like a more gradual scale, it's that thing of lower level monsters still can do damage, they can still hit, they can still be a threat, and some people like that and some people don't like that. I think obviously this one is in its own camp, and and a lot of the bonuses actually scale pretty drastically, where if you're trained in something, I think the bonus that you get is something like, I don't know if it's trained or master, but you get like a bonus of like 4 plus your level, which means that if you're meaning that the differences between the party, like which character can do what, is fairly wide, very drastic. I think some people are going to really like that, and some people are not going to like it. I'll see how it plays out. It's interesting. I don't know exactly how I feel about that. As a GM, I think I don't like it as much. And the reason why I'm leaning towards not liking it is because here's another pro and con, which is that when you have a more gradual scale between the characters, between each of the different monsters, what that means is that you have a lot of wiggle room to run different enemy types. Let me explain. Let's say that the players are 5th level. What that means is that you can't really just like throw like 5 Tarrasques at the party, because they're way too high level. You know, they're ridiculous. But there's a point where it's kind of a gray area in between, where it's like, this is a monster that's a bit higher level, but is kind of takeable. And in a gradual scale, you have a wider gap, like a wider hit range of like, you can use any of these monsters in this particular area. And if it's a little bit out, you can kind of down level it. Say it's like it's like a little bit injured, or use a fewer hit dice, and then it still works perfectly fine. But when you have a more steep scale, that window of monsters that you use gets narrower and narrower and narrower, to where if you have characters running around at like 10th level, like there are certain like low level zombies that you just can't use because they're so weak that they physically can't hurt the players, or the players can just wreck them, or the reverse of the players just physically cannot fight this guy. Like there's nothing that they have that can even get a solid hit on this enemy. And I worry that having a steep scale means that the window of monsters you can use is like really narrow. And my concern is that it's going to be one of those things where, you know, like, oh, what's like the best challenge for the player? What's like the ideal challenge? Oh, frost giants. Okay, you guys are going to have to travel and fight frost giants now. You know, like the story has to move to get the characters into a position to fight enemies that are of that level, because if you don't do that, then they're either fighting things that are too easy or too hard. And I think with the leveling system, that's always kind of been a problem, that you have these monsters. Sometimes there's a monster that's really cool, you want them to fight them, but it's just too high level. And so you have to like basically waste their time in a way trying to get them to a higher level to fight this enemy, or you have to force the story down a direction to where they're fighting something's at the appropriate level. Like, oh, we're fighting orcs now because you guys are between this level range, and there's, you know, you have to fight these enemies because those are the only ones that are available now. So I think a lot of people like it, and I think a lot of people enjoy it, but I worry, and I don't think I'm going to like it as much, but we'll see. You know, we'll see. I'm looking forward to getting a few games under my belt of this, and actually getting some actual information to tell you what I think. An actual review instead of a first impressions video. One of the major rules changes that their, you know, way of kind of making it easier to understand and kind of streamlining it is to have a lot of different conditions, and then a lot of the spells will call back to those conditions. So for example, you'll have like doomed, clumsy, dazzled, encumbered, fascinated, clumsy, broken, helpful, observed, prone, stupefied, quickened, sickened. Basically, they added a lot of these conditions, and so a lot of the spells and the magic and the different maneuvers call back to these conditions. And so that was one of their ways of streamlining it. In addition, each of the conditions, a lot of the conditions will have different tiers or levels. So for example, there's like clumsy 1, clumsy 2, clumsy 3, and each one gives you a different penalty. So a clumsy 1 is a -1 penalty to a bunch of stats, and then a clumsy 3 is -3 to a bunch of different stats. And so they can progress. And so if you get like hit, or it could worsen or something. So I think that's interesting. Also, magic items. Love the magic items. It's so cool that they have a big thick, you know, like section on magic items in here, and there's different scales of magic items. You have like oh, it's this like ring of lightning, but like you have the low level one, and then you have like the higher level versions of it. I think that's cool. I think I like magic swag. Like that's something I think is really cool. And I know some groups do not like high magic settings, but I am not one of them. I love high magic settings. I love having magic, and I love giving them out to players, and then I love looking through them. This is really cool. This is one of the, like, I take back any bad thing I said. This is so cool. This is the part I'm super excited about. Is the magic items and being able to kind of play with these. This is awesome. This is one of the things I'm really, really excited about, and I know this was Pathfinder 1 as well. Also, as far as one of the things I didn't really point out earlier is also as far as condensing the rules. It's not like they didn't reduce any of the rules, you know, per se. This is not like we're trying to make this more condensed version. You know, they still want, I feel like, a lot of rules, but like that's their intent. Their intent is they still want to have a very complex game with a lot of stuff in it. They're not interested in going the route of like gutting the system and then it being, you know, the size of a pamphlet. But on that note, the core rulebook, this is a little bit controversial. I don't know if people are going to like this or not. In case you're not aware of this, there is kind of a split in like the RPG community on core rulebooks, because some people really like them and some people hate them. Okay, most of the time there's a guy who runs the game and there are players, and there's some people argue that there should be 2 books, one for the DM and then one for the players, and that makes it easier, it makes it cheaper, because then the player just has to buy the player's handbook and the DM just has to buy the DMG. But some people argue like, well, you know, the players sometimes need to access the DMG, and then in addition, why wouldn't you just have one book? And so, core rulebook. You know, like, let's put all the rules in one place. And some people really like the fact that all the rules are in here. There's even a setting in here as well. it might be kind of cool for the players to have access to this and be like, oh, I want to be from this town or this city. And have a setting in the core rulebook might be awesome, because then the players can look at it and they can see it and be like, oh my god, I could be from this place, Shining Kingdoms. Oh, Rasmaron, that sounds so cool, and they pick it. That might be interesting. Very excited, very excited. There is a little bit of a concern that maybe if you're having different setting, like the pages might not do anything. Like, okay, we play in this setting, and then if you want to switch to a different homebrew setting, which a lot of people play homebrew settings, that it might be irritating. I don't know. We'll see. I think it's exciting. I have not seen this. So 5th edition just has kind of the gods, and the planes, and that's kind of it in the player's handbook. Getting back into this, with the core rulebook, some people don't like having a core rulebook because they feel like, if I'm just going to be a player, why would I... This is giving me too many excess pages. I'm not going to need the magic item table. I'm not going to need a bunch of these rules. I'm not going to need I don't know, how traps work. Like, I'm not going to need that as a player. Honestly, I think having a core rulebook might be a good idea. Maybe because it's... With Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, or with Player's Handbook, sometimes someone can just walk into a store, they can pay $30, $30, $40, they can get their Player's Handbook, and that's fine. This one, I think, is like $60, $70. And so for a lot of players, you're sort of asking them a tall order. But I will say that it does kind of make sense, because enemies, something's called to like magic, or will call to certain rules that are in the player's handbook, that are in the core rulebook. So it kind of makes sense to have everything in one place. But it's once again, it's up to you. Like, different people have different opinions. Some people like that they're split into multiple books, and then some people prefer them all being in one location. I don't know. You might be that person. I don't. I think I like having the core rulebook, but then again, I have it and I'm like, oh, I like it, it's nice. But if I was someone who was a new player and someone says, oh, you have to buy this book, I could definitely see myself being like, do I have to? Really? And not being happy about that. Although most of the time you just find stuff online. Oh yeah, because I think they have an SRD, the online reference document. So I think you can find... You know what? I will post a link, because I remember them saying that they had an online SRD, because it's being released. I will post the online SRD for this, so that in the link in the description, so that way you can look online. They have all these rules for free, so you can look them up, and you don't have to get this book. So I think, you know what? So I think it might be nice. I don't think it's a big deal. I did also get the bestiary. It's not with me here. It's in a separate room, but it's a bestiary. Not much to say. It has the stats for the monsters. It's nice. It has a lot of the monsters that I'd kind of expect. I did worry. I have seen some bestiaries where they have monsters, and they're like really off the wall monsters that most people don't use, and they're like, oh yeah, the core monsters that people use all the time. Those are going to be coming out in like Bestiary 3, 4, 5. Unfortunately, they didn't do that, so I'm very grateful for that, very excited. Okay, there is one other problem which I want to talk about, which is that they have brought back, from my perspective, they brought back, but they still have kind of the anathema system, or they call it anathema, but it's this idea that some of the classes have these restrictions on their role-playing of, like, you cannot do these things, or like your god... you lose your powers from your god, or something like that. Or there are restrictions on, like, the champion. Like, oh, you're not allowed to do these things. You're not allowed to tell a lie. You're not allowed to be deceitful. You're not allowed to be cruel, torture, stuff like that. And I've never really enforced, like, alignment / certain restrictions on the characters. And so probably if I was going to run it, that would just be a set of rules that I'd ignore. The only one which I might actually have to enforce is the druids. I don't think are allowed to use metal, and that is actually more of a mechanical thing that gives them kind of a uniqueness about them. But I don't normally police my characters in terms of their alignment, and so if it says, like, okay, this class has to remain, lawful good or something, I usually don't police them for that. So even though the book says like, hey, you're supposed to be taking away their alignments, I'm probably going to ignore it. I should probably explain what an anathema is. Anathema is the idea that certain classes are part of religious groups, and then as part of these religious groups, they have certain responsibilities that they take. Classes that actually have anathema, it is the cleric and the druid, where they're not allowed to do certain things, and if they do certain things, then they lose their powers. Despoiling natural places, using metal armor or shields, or teaching the druidic language to non-druids. Okay. The champion has the champion's code. So champions do not. They're 5th edition paladins champion. Anyway, they have the tenets or this code that they have to follow. And I felt like in 5e it was more kind of like a suggestion. I really didn't police it, but even then, this one the way that it's done in Pathfinder, it's more strict. And so I tend to not really like policing the players on their alignments and stuff, so I'm probably not going to be using that. But I definitely could see it being a problem in other people's games. Anyway, that's it. Those are just my thoughts on Pathfinder and RPGs and kind of talking about the history of it. Hopefully you found some of this info interesting. I know that this video is probably going to be out of date in like 2-3 months, because what's going to happen is I'm making a bunch of predictions. And I'm thinking like, oh, I'm reading through it. Like, I think these ideas are pretty cool. And then the second I start playing it, I'm going to realize that I was totally wrong about everything. And this video in probably a year is going to be ridiculous. And either all of my fears were correct, and I was totally correct, or they were all wrong. But I know that probably people were looking more for a review, but a legitimate like review is probably going to take... It's probably going to take at least like 6 months, at least of playing this game in order to actually give you a legitimate thing. And that assumes I'm playing it for the full 6 months, which I have an entire other RPG that I made that's a homebrew system that I have to play test now. And so that's on the table. And then once I get done playtesting that, then I get to, play some more Pathfinder. But anyway, it's going to take me a while. So anyway... and the problem also is that when 5th edition came out, okay, I played 4th edition and I was not a huge fan of it. Really didn't like it, and then I was playing Star Wars, and I wanted to get back into fantasy. So when 5th edition came out, it was like it didn't have a competitor in my. It was just like, oh, I want to play fantasy. I didn't like 4th edition, so it was so easy for me to jump into 5th edition. Whereas the problem is right now I like 5th edition. I really like that system and I love playing it. And so this one has to give me something, more. It has to be, it has to really grab me in a way that 5th edition, didn't. And so it actually, it's in a tougher spot. Plus you have to go through that entire process of learning a new rule set in order to get into it. So I don't know. It's tough to get some time set aside to play it and teach a set of new players how to get into it. But then again, also, it's fantasy world. And there's another part of me that's like, when I play other RPG systems, other than 5th edition, I want to play something that's not, fantasy. Like, sometimes I want to play something that's sci-fi or heroes or horror or something. And so there might be a concern of, like, oh, I'm playing in this fantasy world and I'm going to take a break and then go into, Pathfinder. It sort of feels very similar-y. So we'll see. Basically what I'm saying is I don't know how much time I'm going to put into playing Pathfinder. And Pathfinder really, this is going to be a little bit cold. Like, Pathfinder's kind of not made for me, per se. Because I'm someone who I like how streamlined 5th edition is. I really don't have as much time to kind of devote to studying the rules. And I really like how 5th edition is laid out. Really, Pathfinder is kind of more catering. Pathfinder 2nd edition is more catering to people who were not huge fans of 5th edition, or they've been playing 5th edition and they want more out of the system. Like, it's too simple. Advantage, normal, disadvantage, like that's too... Those three, like, it's too simple. They want kind of the older modifier system. They want to have an added complexity. They want it to be a deeper, more robust system. And I feel like that's kind of what Pathfinder is catering to. And so it is its own unique system. It's not just kind of like another 5th edition. It's not just like kind of cloning 5th edition or whatever. But That being said, I am someone who likes 5th edition, and so because of that, you know, it's harder to get me to play, but like it's not really intended for me, kind of a thing. Anyway, that's it. I'm really excited about Pathfinder 2nd edition. It sounds cool. Hopefully I'll get a chance to play it. We'll see. Thank you guys for stopping by and listening to me rant and ramble on about nothing or some things. I don't know anymore. And that's that. See you around. See you guys on the next video. Take it easy. And goodbye.